I think we have to be the example. I think we have to create new paradigms of letting people see that you can be an organization that does not have much, but you can give plenty.
Welcome to the Zami NoBLA National Organization of Black Lesbians on Aging podcast. We are your sound source for Black lesbian herstory. I'm your host, Angela Denise Davis.
My name is Mary Ann Adams. I move in the world as a community activist, social work educator, and public health researcher. I moved to Atlanta in 1988 from Mississippi, and during that time, I have worked at various academic institutions, specifically Morehouse School of Medicine, Emory School of Medicine, Georgia State School of Public Health, managing large-scale research projects, specifically HIV/AIDS, contraceptive, child psychiatry, and I've also worked as the director of community engagement, working with community-based organizations in and around Metro Atlanta. In 2006, I started my own business, the Adams Research Group. It's a consulting firm helping community-based organizations build their capacity, develop their organization. I do some grant writing, training, and I really love that because what I'm doing is I'm putting my skills to use in helping organizations become better, to become more skilled at what they do.
Well, we're glad to have you here as the guest of our fourth episode, and we are especially excited because you are the founder and executive director of Zami NoBLA, the National Organization of Black Lesbians on Aging. As we say with our tagline, the podcast is a sound source for Black lesbian herstory. We're excited that you're here because you can give us some of the backstory of Zami NoBLA, and we're excited about learning some of your herstory as well. You grew up where?
I grew up in Oxford, Mississippi, and spent a lot of time actually in a very expansive community. This was a place called Freemanstown. And after the Civil War, and particularly after the Emancipation Proclamation, it was a community where freed blacks came to build homes, to start businesses, and to grow families, essentially. Because we were certainly segregated from so many different areas in Oxford, everybody lived together in that community. The janitor lived next to the preacher, who lived next to the school teacher, who lived next to the lawyer. And it was most especially a community where people really looked out for each other. You hear that a lot, certainly, but in my case, it was absolutely true. My mother was a single parent often. My stepfather actually was imprisoned in the state prison called Parchman when I was 6 years old. And the community essentially took us in and looked after us. And at 12, I became really active in a place called the Black House. During that time, there were many civil rights activists who descended on our community. And I think it's important to tell you a bit about Oxford. Oxford is notorious for the University of Mississippi, commonly known as Ole Miss, where James Meredith was one of the first blacks in the South to try to desegregate a primarily white institution. And during that time, there was massive bloodshed. Journalists, reporters, photographers descended from all over the country to this little town. And we lived a stone's throw away from this place. And you could hear the gunshots, and people were actually killed because this black man was essentially trying to get an education. So I grew up against that particular backdrop. And as a result of that, Oxford was a hotbed of activism. Civil rights attorneys and social workers and activists descended on the town and really started to live there. And they did a lot of community organizing and mobilizing. And they took particularly interest in the kids. And I was one of those kids who hung out at the Black House, who was taught how to write news stories. We put together a black newspaper called the Soul Force that we would take out every week to the neighbors. And I read a lot of black books. This was really, I think, my baptism in Black literature, Black civil rights protest material, Black speeches. It was a very heady time for me.
I remember several years ago you're giving a story course interview talking about your time in Mississippi. And I also have heard you talk about in the past how, in particular, there were some very key individuals in your childhood who really gave you a different perspective about aging and what it means to care for each other and helped give you a sense of caregiving. I know Miss Savannah is one woman you talked about. Can you talk a little bit about those experiences with those older women who were caregivers for you, but who also allowed you to really think about caregiving in some very interesting ways?
I think that it's important to contextualize that in the work that I was doing at the time. In addition to being around all of those activists at the Black House and working on the newsletter, I was also working in the cooperative movement. I was working in the co-op store. There was also a co-op credit union that we had in Oxford that was founded by Reverend Wayne Johnson, who had moved to Oxford from Indiana. He had lived there previously. And so I was really taught to serve. And one of the things that happened during that time was my grandmother taking me around to her friends' homes who were ill and who were elderly. And it didn't feel like a chore or a responsibility or an obligation. It was what you did to help out your neighbor. It was what you did as a human being to uphold the dignity of a person. And I saw this time and time again. And so I started to really look around in my community and see how I could help other people on my own as well. And there was a woman who lived across the street from me named Miss Savannah, and she was 60-something years old at the time. I was a very shy, lonely kid. And Miss Savannah took a particular interest in me and would have me do chores, and I often spend time with her and would tell me stories. I think really instilled in me this service, the fact that she was by herself, she was alone, and she really needed me, and I needed her in a particularly unique kind of way. And I think that began for me an interest in older people, specifically older women who appeared to be, as I look back on it, very socially isolated. Miss Savannah was one of the first Black women in Oxford who had purchased land, who had built her own home, who had children she had educated, who were now school teachers. So she, by any stretch of the imagination, was very successful. And she gave back in the way that she could. So I looked at this woman who had given so much, and here she was at the end of her life, essentially alone and isolated. And it really left an indelible imprint on me.
I've also heard you talk about being in Mississippi and being a young woman, discovering who you were as a lesbian and really not having a community or resources to help you find your way into your sexual identity.
Well, I came out fairly late. When you put it in the context of today's time, I knew at 19 that I was a lesbian. I discovered that essentially when I was living on an Army base in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, trying to figure out what I was going to do with the rest of my life. I had graduated from the University of Mississippi. I was living with my aunt and uncle and floundering essentially, and really had a lot of time for the first time in years to just stop and figure out who I was and how I was going to spend the rest of my life. I really started to come to terms with my sexuality. That was 19. But when I went back to Mississippi, my mother was diagnosed with cancer, and there was a whole lot to do. So I essentially put my sexuality on the back burner in terms of that further discovery of who and what I was. She died after some years, and I became legal guardian of my 3 siblings. And my parents were very poor. I became the major breadwinner, and I was working a couple of jobs trying to take care of them. And again, I was dating men. I knew I was lesbian. I did not know any other lesbians in Mississippi. And by this time, I had migrated to Jackson, Mississippi, and was living there, and was really very lonely, very isolated. I actually started to subscribe to the Gay Community News. It was published in New York, and it would come every week, and it would have 1,000 staplers. And I was so excited, and I would go to my bedroom, and I would close the door, and I would take 30 minutes getting all these staplers out. And this is where a whole new world opened up to me around LGBT issues. And particularly, I found out that there was this whole world of Black lesbians, musicians and poets and writers and organizers. And this is where I first learned about Audre Lorde from the Gay Community News. It literally saved my life.
So you had this this real resource of information that shaped you, as you say. And how long after that was it that you moved to Atlanta?
I moved to Atlanta in 88. So there was about a 10, 12-year period where I was gathering information, if you will. And during that time, I also was able to enter into my first relationship. And then I met another lesbian. This whole world of women opened up to me. So it wasn't that there were no Black lesbians in Jackson. Of course, there's Jackson State University, there's Tougaloo College, there's Mississippi College, there's Belhaven. But I did not know who they were. I didn't have that entree. And I was very busy trying to provide for my siblings and was pretty much hanging out with a group of Black nationalists, folks who were really down for the cause, who had children, and who were very homophobic, quite frankly. So there was no entryway for me to expand the space where I was at that time, to meet other people who were very different from my life and from the life that I was creating for me and my siblings.
So what brought you to Atlanta?
I met a woman a Black lesbian who lived in Birmingham. There was a lesbian and gay conference that I went to in Birmingham, and I met this woman and started to go to Birmingham to see her. And in turn, they would have a meeting in Birmingham once a month called Second Sundays. And they would bring in lesbian musicians, and it was a potluck essentially. Mm-hmm. And I was able to meet other women during that time. And so I met a woman who was in Atlanta attending the university here. And I always knew that when my youngest sibling graduated from high school and went off to college, that I would leave Mississippi. It just so happened that these things kind of dovetailed. And when my youngest sibling graduated high school, I moved to Atlanta.
And when you moved here, what type of community did you find?
Well, I was searching for a Black lesbian community. That was really important to me. I'd not had that. And because I'd read so much about it, and particularly after reading Zami, Audre Lorde's biomythography, A New Spelling of My Name, I was extremely curious. And I wanted that community. I wanted that for myself. I'd never had that. And I felt like it would complete me in some way, or it would certainly answer some questions that I'd been asking. And I was looking for a Black lesbian community and was not able to find it. Somebody started telling me about Zami, but there was no address or working phone number. And this white lesbian who was a journalist at the time at one of the gay rags here had a potluck at her house and invited all the Black lesbians who she knew involved with Zami. And that's how I met them and became involved with the organization. It was a time when lesbians were very, very closeted. Women didn't feel safe to come out. They feared that they would lose their jobs, they would lose their families, and certainly many had at that point. And so there was no consistency in terms of meetings or in terms of organizing. Mm-hmm. It was very difficult to develop a consistent, a coherent, a cohesive community. They might meet one month, they might not. They change leaderships often. And so I finally met the woman who had started the organization, who had since dropped out. And she and I started having monthly meetings and decided that we would try to keep the organization together. We wanted to be more visible. We wanted women to be able to find us. We wanted to be more out. We wanted to give a voice to our concerns and our needs. And we started to do that. The women, we would meet at Karis Books once a month. And literally, there would be women who would be there. If you saw them in the street on Monday, you did not dare speak to them. They would not make eye contact. They were so rooted in fear for their lives and their livelihood.
So who founded Zami?
A woman named Iris Rafi. It's my understanding that back in the day, and when I say back in the day, I guess I'm talking in the early 70s, there was an organization called ALGA, the African American Lesbian and Gay Alliance. And at some point, there started to be some tension, some friction between the Black gay men and Black lesbians, because it was my understanding that there were some allegations that the Black gay men were very sexist. And so the women decided they would start their own organization while still remaining active in ALGA. At some point, there became some dis-ease around who should comprise the membership. There were Black lesbians who wanted to invite other women of color and white lesbians. And there was a group of Black lesbians who wanted it to remain all Black. And so they decided that they would agree to disagree, and they disbanded this particular organization. And later on, Iris came back. She had met Audre Lorde in Germany and came back and decided that she wanted to start a new organization. And she called together the Black lesbians who wanted it just to be an organization for Black lesbians, because she was so inspired by meeting Audre Lorde, by hearing what she had to say. And so hence Zami was born.
That's a beautiful herstory.
Yes. And I think it's one that many people don't know. I think it's important for us to tell these stories, to learn these stories, to keep these stories alive, because they really feed the genesis of how we began. And while it may not be this nice, cute story all wrapped up in a box, it's factual, it's true, and it's instructive, because it gives us the kinds of teachings and stories that we need to build on and to perhaps do things different, or perhaps do them the same way. But I do think they're very instructive.
By the time I came to know you in 2008, you were really providing solo leadership along with the board in terms of doing some amazing work with Zami. And then you had an idea. Of course, I'm talking about the origin of Zami NoBLA.
Sure. It became painfully obvious to me that in addition to the external oppression that we face as Black lesbians in the city, in the state, and in the country, there were also a lot of internalized oppressions that we were experiencing as a result of the injustice and the external oppressions and the homophobia and the racism and the classism and the sexism, and really thought it was important to try to galvanize resources. I mentioned earlier that my background is community organizing. I started doing that when I was 12 years old. I have a undergrad degree in social work and sociology, and I have a master's in social work. So I am a trained community organizer and social work educator. A lot of people say to me, well, Marianne, we can't do what you do. Well, I am trained to do this, and I have a passion for it. I believe the only reason we're on this planet is to help each other. So you have all these things coupled together, and I'm always wanting to try to figure out ways that we can bring people together, ways we can impact social isolation, ways we can make this world better. And that involves bringing together and pooling as many resources as possible. In addition to having the support groups, at one point we were running 4 support groups. We had a lot of older women who needed to talk about coming out, who were estranged from their families. We had women who had children, who had been in relationships with men, who had come out of those relationships and needed community. So additionally, we had women who had interrupted or disrupted or had never been able to get their education. And they were struggling, trying to find funding to attend school and to complete that. One of the things that was important to me as someone who was fortunate enough, having grown up in a very poor family, to get my education. And education, I believe, has really been the key to my being able to help myself and to help other women. I wanted to start a scholarship fund. And the impetus for that was a student at Spelman College named Wendy O'Neill. Wendy was a fierce student activist who worked often in the Atlanta community and was a major artist at the time and needed to get her transcript from Spelman and didn't have the funds to do that. And so I said to one of my friends, a Black lesbian, we should start a scholarship fund. And she laughed at me and said, you have to be kidding. Nobody's going to give money to Black lesbians to go to school or to further their education. And I said, you may be right, but we have not, because we asked not. Mm-hmm. And I am going to start the scholarship fund. And I am going to certainly name it after my patron saint, Audre Lorde.
And this was while you were still under the framework of Zami.
That's correct.
Okay.
So this would be a program of Zami. This was 1995. Zami was not incorporated, but we were not a 501c3 organization at the time. So it took me 2 years to find a fiscal sponsor and to raise the first funds to award these scholarships. We found a fiscal sponsor in the Fund for Southern Communities. And in 1997, we gave the first 2 scholarships of $1,000 each. One to Wendy O'Neill, who was at Spelman, and Nakia Works, who was a student at Georgia State University. At the time, they were on the quarter system. It was like $750 to go. And essentially, her mother had just put her out. And so she was couch surfing and trying to finish up her education at Georgia State. And we had this huge reception because we were so proud to be able to do this. Her mother, who had not been speaking to her, actually came to the reception to lay eyes on us because her mother did not believe that we would give her daughter $1,000 with no strings attached. So she wanted to make sure that we were legitimate and that we were not preying on her daughter, if you will. And so that was the first acknowledgement of the community and of us to each other in terms of we can do this. We can actually help each other. We can give back to our communities, which was extremely important to us. The scholarship lasted for 10 years. And during that time, it went from giving scholarships to local Black lesbians to expanding to give scholarships to Black gay men and Black lesbians to expanding to give scholarships to LGBT scholars of color living anywhere in the country. And our last year, which was roughly 2008, we also had an international scholar, a student who was in South Africa. After 10 years of doing the scholarship, and I think it's important for me to note here that in order to get a scholarship from the Audre Lorde Scholarship Fund, you had to agree to come to Atlanta in September for the huge scholarship reception. This was an all expense paid trip that we funded. We raised the money because it was important for us to have these students to get immersed in community, to meet each other, to meet the fierce activists and just folks in Atlanta who were LGBT folk. A lot of these students were able during that time to form these amazing relationships with their donors as well as with each other and local people in the community. It became a huge event every year. It was one that people just really, really looked forward to. And we went from 2 scholarships the first year. At one point, one year, we had 22 scholars. And we've had 18 at one time. So I would say from those first $2,000 at the end, we'd given over $200,000 in scholarships and expenses to these students all over the world. And then I looked around. We were all getting older. We had a board of directors. We had a membership organization. And this has been 10, 15 years of doing this work. Mm-hmm. And we needed to take a break. And we took a break. And then I looked around and realized that folks were now 40 and 50 and 60 and 70. And they were invisible. They had disappeared from the scene. There were very few lesbian bars, but what lesbian bars there were, you did not really see women older than 40 in these places. And I wondered, where are they? Why are they disappearing? What resources do they have? Where's community for them? Mm-hmm. And at this point, the them became the me, the we, the I. We were essentially invisible. I was saddened by that. I thought that we could start another organization. The organizing, the community mobilization, the resources that we had garnered, the funds that we had raised, we could do that for women who were 40 and older. I did not see any avenue. I didn't see any programming. I didn't see any organization filling that void. So I thought, I've always been the type of person that if there's a need, I don't wait for other people to do it. I will do it myself. And so I decided that we would start an organization for Black lesbians 40 and older.
And what year was this?
This was roughly 2011. After I decided that, I actually talked with Vera Martin, who at the time was 80-something years old, Black lesbian, who had been very active with OLOC, Old Lesbians Organizing for Change. That's a predominantly white lesbian organization, and Vera was one of the few Black women who was active in the organization. She had amazing community organizing skills, and she was living on women's land in Arizona. She and another older Black lesbian were two living, I guess, with 20 other white lesbians. They all had their own trailers, and I just felt like I wanted to reach out to her because she could be a source of wisdom for me. She was very, very generous with her time. Mm-hmm. We talked for a number of hours about this, and on more than one occasion. She gave me a lot of really good tips and a lot of good strategies to organize this. And then I called together some Black lesbians in the community, and I talked to them about what I wanted to do, and they thought it was a great idea. So essentially they said, this is great. We will support your vision. We need this. This is vitally important. And so hence, Zami NoBLA was born.
Tell us about the significance of the name Zami NoBLA.
We kept the Zami because we were known in the community and literally all over the world, all over the country, for the work that we had done. Mm-hmm. We had a really, really good reputation. We'd done really good work that we were proud of. And so that instant recognition, that herstory, was important for us not to interrupt that. The National Organization of Black Lesbians on Aging was very intentional. We wanted an organization that was national in scope, that was based here in the South. That was really important to us because we understand acutely the reputation or the misconception or the misinformation that a lot of people have about Black queer people in the South. And some of those misconceptions and some of the misinformation, I think some of those messages are about the fact that we're not smart, we can't organize, we can't mobilize, and we wanted to really kind of disrupt that narrative. We want to build to being a membership organization, having chapters in as many cities and towns and as we can. So that's something that we're working toward.
I just want to play devil's advocate for a moment and say, well, why should we turn the lens towards older Black lesbians? What matters when we look at this population? Why is this significant? Why does this work need to be supported?
One, it's important to tell our own stories. Two, it's important to acknowledge and recognize the work that these people who are now 60, 70, 80, and 90 years old have done to get us where we are today. The work that they've done, these folks were pioneers. Mm-hmm. They are the reason why we can sit here and have a podcast and that has in the title Zami NoBLA, National Organization of Black Lesbians on Aging. We need to make sure that as they age in place, that many of the health disparities that are experienced by older people, period, they don't experience an undue burden of those. I read some research recently that there were 1 to 2 million LGBT older adults, 65 and older. And it's estimated that in the year 2030, that is going to change significantly to 3.6 million older adults. And we do know that we are impacted more by health disparities. We are twice as likely as heterosexual people to live alone. And because many of us are estranged from our blood families, we have constructed families of choice. Those families look many different ways. And so we have to take care of each other. We have to make sure that those social determinants of health, and that means those conditions that affect you where you live, work, and play, are not adversely affecting our older lesbians in a way that they're not able to thrive and live their best lives.
Speak about some of the health disparities your organization has been a part of in terms of the research I know that Zami NoBLA has done, and also some of the economic realities of older Black lesbians.
I am a 12-year breast cancer survivor, and breast cancer is still one of those diagnoses that some women feel a lot of shame and stigma around. As a result, they don't really openly talk about the fact that they received this diagnosis. I've had Black lesbians to call me because I've been able to live my diagnosis out loud as well as my survivorship, to say to me, you know, my partner has been diagnosed. She doesn't want me to talk about it. I need community. I need some support. And I've gotten these calls more than I'd like to recount. And we also know that there are women, Black lesbians in the city who are masculine of center who've never ever had a mammogram. While white women are diagnosed more often than Black women tend to be diagnosed later at later stages and tend to die sooner. And that certainly goes for Black lesbians. And so in 2012, we thought it was important to put on a 2-day conference, Black Lesbians and Breast Cancer. And we were able to partner with the Center for Black Women Wellness and with Mercy Mobile to bring a mammography van to the site where we were and to get a grant to pay the copay. And we were able to have at least 25 Black lesbians, 35 and older, to get mammograms, and many for the first time because they felt safe with us. And that was really just a wonderful thing to be able to come together, to be able to have workshops on nutrition and mental health, to do that. We also know that there's not much funding because of homophobia and oppression, national funding, federal funding for LGBT issues. Only lately, with LGBT funders and foundations, have we been able to apply for grants and get those grants. But we also know without data, it's very difficult to get the interventions established to get the help that we need. And so it's important that we participate in research. But many of us have been in these academic institutions and we've learned so much, and we've been able to get public health degrees and sociology degrees and social work degrees that we can develop our own research projects.
And Zami NoBLA's been doing some of that.
Zami NoBLA has been doing some of that. In 2014, I was able to get funding from the Georgia State University School of Public Health to do a qualitative research project looking at Black lesbians and aging. I was fortunate enough to have as a co-principal investigator Dr. Tonya Poteet, who is a Black lesbian researcher who focuses on LGBT health issues, to serve as a co-principal investigator. The women in Atlanta were amazingly amazingly supportive. We were able to get 100 Black lesbians, 41 to 92, to participate in these 14 focus groups. That's a very large sample size. Mm-hmm. There's no other research that exists right now with that sort of sample size of Black lesbians in the South. And so it's amazing information. We were able to publish an article in the Women in Aging Journal recently that people should take a look at. And we are also, most importantly, telling this story through publications and through research from Black lesbians themselves. One of the most salient issues to emerge from this research from these Black lesbians, from these 100 Black lesbians, was the need for holistic mental health interventions. This was very important to these women. And, there was one question that was asked: if you, in an ideal world, if you had money was no object, what would you do? What would you most like to see? And to a woman, they all said, we would really love to have a holistic facility, a center where it's important that it's an intergenerational center, and that we have everything under one roof. Mm-hmm. And we really, really want to be able to have quality, supportive, affirming, empowering housing. That was very important to them. We do know that one of the issues most impacting Black lesbians right now is the need for accessible, quality, affordable housing.
And that really speaks to some of the economic issues that I wanted to discuss around older Black lesbians and how sexual identity and one's career development across the lifespan can really affect how one finds housing as an elder.
That's absolutely correct. I would be remiss if I didn't at least take a moment to talk about the women who are now 65, 70, at retirement age, who for the last 20, 30, 40 years interrupted their education, women who refused to pass, and many of them could, who took jobs under the table, who were thrown out of their households, and who really banded together and took jobs, washing dishes and driving trucks and working on cars, jobs that did not pay, where they didn't have a 401k retirement fund, where they did not pay into Social Security, where there's no record that they've even worked, essentially. And now they find themselves, many at retirement age, unpartnered, don't have a supportive family who can assist them financially, and they are living in poverty. So we really want to find a way to assist these women, because we don't believe that they have to live this way. We believe that there are enough resources in our community so that we can provide for women that find themselves in such dire straits. Zami NoBLA established a lesbian elder fund where we've been able to raise money to help women pay their rent, pay their phone bill, pay their mortgage. There's a huge need. And because we are an organization now that's really getting on our feet, it's very difficult to meet the need, quite frankly. Mm-hmm. We were fortunate enough last year to get an offer from one of our board members to help renovate a house for very little. She's leasing this for us for very little money. And we decided that this would be an ideal situation to provide some quality, accessible, affordable, long-term, permanent housing for 2 Black lesbians 55 and older. People have said to us, will this be transitional housing? Will it be temporary housing? And our response is no. Where are the women going to? We don't foresee them going anyplace else. And we've been able to raise some money online to do some work on the outside, but we still are in need of funds to finish remodeling the inside. We'd like to make this currently it's 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, and we'd like to convert this into a 2 bedroom, 2 bath because if the women don't know each other, they will at least have their own living quarters and their own bathroom. And it's important for us that this be accessible. We want to make sure before we go in that this place, that we have to widen the doors, because this house is 70 years old. And so there are a lot of modern touches that this house does not have. So we need to build a ramp outside at the front door. We need to widen the doorways in the house. We need to essentially make sure that the bathroom and everything there is equipped for somebody who may or may not have a disability.
And officially, this is called the Zami NoBLA Biggers Residence?
Yes, Zami NoBLA Biggers Residence for Black lesbian elders. It's important that it's a long name, certainly, but it's a very significant and important name. We want to name ourselves. We want to continue to say that name out loud. We want people to know that we are here. We're doing everything we can to impact our invisibility, because many of us as we age are simply invisible. And so we have developed a lot of different spaces on social media to organize and together Black lesbians over 40. We have a book club. We have a financial education group. We have a Facebook group. We have a Facebook page. We have a website. And so it's important that you be able to find us. And of late and very, very significant, we have now the Zami NoBLA podcast.
And just stepping back a moment and talking about the importance of saying names, I just want to stop and say the name of Dr. Edith Biggers, who is a board member who is making the residence available through a lease to Zami NoBLA. In addition to the name of Dr. Edith Biggers, who is on your board, can you give us the names of your other board members?
I would love to. The board of directors for Zami NoBLA is an energetic, committed, brilliant group of women. And they are doing everything they can to make sure that this organization progresses and that it moves forward in a significant way. We have a new board chairwoman, Emma Folks. Our vice chair is S.M. Neck. Jocelyn Lyles is our treasurer. And Brooke Smith Perry is our web person. I also want to shout out to Dream Gomez, who has been doing amazing work on our website, and our photographer, videographer, who has donated so much to Zami NoBLA, Marilyn Nieves. Also, we have an advisory board, Wilhelmina Perry, who is in New York City, Brenda Crawford in Vallejo, California, and Doreen Watson in Orlando, Florida.
I loved how you said earlier that we're put on this planet to help each other.
I do believe that that's the only reason we're here. We do a lot of things. We do service, we do advocacy, and we do research. And we give resources. We give of ourselves. We look bigger than we are. We have been fortunate enough, as I mentioned earlier, to amass a lot of skills. And experience and education.
And friends.
Absolutely. And so what we don't have in funding or money, we make up for it in those wonderful gifts and graces. I believe that there is an opportunity here for us to write ourselves in the history books. There's one common denominator that we all have in this world, and that is that we're all older today than we were yesterday, and we all at some point will die. That may sound dire to some people because we don't want to talk about death and dying, but it's a reality. Nobody gets out of this life alive. So if we can't come together around the fact that we all are going to age, then I don't know what we can come together around. And so we have to start now preparing to take care of ourselves and each other. And collectively, as a community, we have the resources to do this.
Well, I think it's interesting that you would put in the piece about death, because I was just listening this afternoon, in fact, to an interview that Audre Lorde gave in 1982. And she talked about one of the ways that we survive death is by doing things in our lives that live beyond our life. And I found that to be very inspiring, because I see Zami NoBLA and other agencies like this as ways in which we can participate in a movement that really is about changing the lives of people and making opportunities available for Black lesbians, older Black lesbians, that if we don't do the work, those opportunities would not be present.
I want to talk about the intergenerational work that we do, and also the work that we do now. Women who are coming behind us will not have to do the same work. They will have different work, but they won't have to make the same mistakes that we've made. They won't have to try to find the same resources that we found, because we're leaving a footprint for them. We have, at Zami, we were very careful to make sure that not only did we tell our own stories, but that we left a record of it. And so we have archival materials now that are at Auburn Avenue Research Library, because 100 years from now, 200 years from now, we want people to know that we were here. And this is what we did. This is how we were able to change our circumstances and the conditions and circumstances of women coming after us. And so we will also do the same thing with the genesis and the work of Zami NoBLA. It's very important for LGBT folk to make sure that you keep your records, you document what you've done, you tell your own story, because we know that if it's not written down, it did not happen. And if you do not tell your story, someone will tell your story for you. And so we need to be able to do that. And I think importantly, how do you want to show up in that story? How do you want to show up in those archival materials 100 years from now? Do you want to show up as an organization that took care of your own? I think we do. I know that we do. And I know that we can.
And I think also to add to that is, if we don't tell our stories, there's a threat of someone telling our stories incorrectly.
Yes. 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 Absolutely.
What is the legacy you want to leave, Marianne Adams?
I was here, and that I helped somebody. That's the legacy that I want to leave. I'm not interested in grandiosity, anybody getting up, telling a grand speech. If people get up and talk about me, I want them to talk about the fact that I served. That's the only reason I'm here.
So how do you believe the best way forward, helping people move out of a mindset of scarcity, those who do, to a mindset of abundance, particularly as it relates to the projects and the work that you're doing at Zami NoBLA?
I think we have to be the example. I think we have to create new paradigms of letting people see that you can be an organization that does not have much, but you can give plenty. For example, Zami NoBLA just put out a survey, financial literacy survey for LGBT individuals living anywhere in this country, 18 and older. We want to know on that survey, what kind of financial literacy skills would you like to learn? And what's the best methodology for us to impart this information to you? We will take the analysis of that survey and we will develop some workshops face-to-face, some webinars. Now, we could certainly take that information and we could develop programs just for Black lesbians 40 and older, but one common denominator is that we can come together around is financial literacy. All of us in the LGBT community, want to know how we can live better lives economically and financially. And so that's one way I think we can be the example that we want to see. We will take our resources and we will extend those resources to the entire LGBT community. Anybody who wants to take advantage of this financial literacy and this training, will be able to do that. And so it's just like the scholarship fund. We also have a scholarship fund for Black lesbians and lesbians of color, 40 and older, living anywhere in this country. We have decided that we know how to do a scholarship fund. We've done it very well. So why not take that and benefit women who never had the chance to get an education, or women who were not able to continue because they don't have the resources, who want to better their lives. And hopefully once we do this would be an example for them to give back, for them to pour into the scholarship fund. And so it's reciprocity. We continue to give each other, but that's what I think we can do. We can be the example that we want to see in the world.
It is very clear that you're very passionate about this work, and you're very much centered around service and leadership. I can't imagine anyone leaving a conversation with you not understanding that. That's very clear.
Well, Angela, when I think about my life, there is not anything at this point in my life that I need. As a young Black girl growing up in Mississippi who was hungry more often than not, who never had stable housing. I probably lived in 15 different homes by the time I was 16 years old. I am also someone who has been on my own since I was 16 years old. I understand lack. I understand scarcity, but that did not make me someone who believed that I needed to only look out for myself. It did not develop me into a person who believes that I need to hoard whatever I get. I need nothing at this point. There are many things I want, but I don't need anything. And so it's not just for me that I do this because I'm okay. It's for people who can't not do, or don't have the skills, or don't have the passion, or don't have the friends, or don't have the resources that I have. That is why I do what I do.
Are there other things you want to leave our listeners with before we end our time together?
I want you to, if you are someone who believes that you have nothing to give, to really think about what skills, what graces, what gifts you have, and extend that to someone other than yourself. It could be calling up somebody to have a conversation. We have many, many elders who live alone, who don't have the benefit of a human voice. Go out of your way to just say hello, pick up the phone, take someone to lunch, become involved in something other than yourself. That is what I would like to leave our listeners with.
Marianne Adams, thank you for being part of our Black Lesbian Herstory.
Thank you for doing this work. I'm excited about it. I think it's seminal work. It's certainly creating paradigms for other Black lesbian organizations because we need our stories out there. We need our voices heard. And we need, most importantly, to continue to keep forming community with each other. So thank you for having me.
Wasn't that a great conversation with Zami NoBLA's Executive Director, Marianne Adams? I know you are as excited about the opportunities that exist with this organization just like I am. Wow. If you want more information, we want to direct you towards our website, www.zaminobla.org. And since you're listening to the podcast, I am assuming that you have found a way to find us. But I also want to say, if you want to subscribe, which is free, it's just a way of making sure that our podcast gets on your smartphone every time we release a new episode. You can go to iTunes and have our episodes downloaded automatically to your smartphone, or Google Play, or Stitcher. If you would like to have the convenience of not having to worry about making sure those episodes are on your phone, we'd like you to go to those apps and subscribe. You can also listen to the podcast by visiting our website, our YouTube channel, and checking out our Facebook page. If you have any feedback or comments, feel free to email me at podcast@ZamiNoBLA.org. Again, it was great having your ear this day, and I look forward to spending many more conversations with you in the future as we continue to make Black lesbian herstory. Have a sweet one.
Hey.